Hello,
Us.
welcome. Hope you're all well. We're going to do a short and easy question and answer today, simply because it's been a long day of training, and I think last time we did a Q&A, it was pretty popular, and we covered a really wide range of subjects too, not just technical. But if you've got any technical questions, any conditioning questions, so you can start off with that concept of Shingi Tai, which is the mind, the technique, and the physical conditioning. So if you've got any questions about any of that, please hit us up. Otherwise, we'll just talk to ourselves.
Actually, I got one to kick off, Shihan. When it comes to the spiritual side of things, there's a belief that as you get higher up in the ranks in the martial arts, that it becomes more spiritual and you become more enlightened in that area, and that area becomes deeper and so on. How do you think a martial artist, I don't like to use the word should, but how
talk about that idea of there being many paths up the mountain, but as those paths draw closer together, you realize they're basically the same. The main thing about the martial arts is, I think there's two problems. One is because it has this built-in hierarchical system of rewards as you go up in the ranks. People confuse that. Usually, quite often, they're just rewards given for time. But everyone grows old, even idiots. So there is no inverse correlation between getting ranks and doing away with ignorance. You can be just as ignorant as a 10th Dan as you can as a Shodan. But the theory and the idea that a lot of them with a vested interest try to protect is that, yes, as you get higher up in the rank, you incredibly become more spiritually enlightened. And it's a total fallacy, because if any activity you do is going to take you higher in terms of the spiritual aspect, that activity has to directly do away with foolishness and ignorance, and martial arts doesn't do that. So just because someone has a very high rank doesn't mean that they're enlightened. Having said that, I think from my perspective, the way I approach the gradings is that first Dan, second Dan, they're the tough fighting Dans. They're the grades where you're at your peak of youthful strength, theoretically. Okay, I know some people don't start till 40. Some people start much younger. But the reality is that in terms of the objectives of the different ranks, first and second Dan arguably are the strong fighting realms. Okay, and then second and third and fourth Dan, which are the ranks of sensei. I don't think anyone, look, if I had my way, no one would ever get anywhere in Kyokushin, or because you just see that there is no advancement on an emotional and an intellectual level. And just because someone is tough at fighting, it doesn't mean anything. Solso is so adamant about this. But third Dan, fourth Dan is called sensei, which means someone who's gone before you. So theoretically, they should have achieved at least some sort of emotional stability and intellectual, psychological understanding. It's not necessarily the case. And then you go fifth and sixth Dan, which are like the Shihan levels, which theoretically recognizes that person as having achieved something quite special, and they have. And if they've achieved those ranks through legitimate ways, not through having received them as like an honorary thing. In the past in Kyokushin, there's been some instructors who just literally give out Dan certificates like Christmas cards. It's just their way of saying, you're a cool guy. It was nice to meet you. Here's a 6th Dan or a 7th Dan or an 8th Dan, And that's all very well, as long as that person, when they get it, goes, yeah, that was nice. Put it on my wall in my bedroom, and I won't say anything to anyone about it. But when you get one of those honorary certificates and then use that as part of your marketing program, that not only have I got this, I've also got that and that and that, without telling people actually it was just a piece of paper you received after a conversation at a coffee shop, and that sort of behavior is a perfect example why there is very little correlation between going up in ranks and any spiritual advancement. So if you do want to, I think, connect your martial arts training to some degree of inner growth, when we say spiritual advancement, we mean, growing emotionally, growing intellectually, growing in a way that draws you closer to a clear understanding of what is right and what is wrong. Well, then you have to incorporate certain practices with that. And by that, I mean self-reflection. Solsai talks about that even in the 11 mottos, that you have to see that self-reflection as a really important part of your daily training. You have to, we talked about this in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, of course.
And the Bhagavad Gita, the Indian Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, is literally an example of the conflict within us between right and wrong, and every day asking yourself, how did I go? What did I do? Did I do well? Didn't I do well? If I screwed up, well, next time that happens, I'm going to have to do something about it. So you can start off by incorporating the daily ritual of self-reflection. That's a good start. Once you've got that going on, well, then I think it's the next level is to start to incorporate some form of meditation. And I think that really, if you're going to connect your martial arts to any sort of spiritual or inner growth, there has to be a level of meditation. A little bit beyond Cesar, Mokso, take half a breath, and Mokso Yame. That's a start. I always say that you measure your progress in anything beginning with a single breath. And from that single breath, then you can expand 2 breaths, 5 breaths. And then you can keep going until you're doing those activities which return the flow of energy out the senses within. My wife asked me a couple of really interesting questions today. We were talking about that beautiful quote, beware of the emotional reaction to the inevitable fluctuation of the phenomenal world. And she said, well, what exactly is a phenomenal world? Because we normally see something phenomenal as something special. But what the phenomenal world means is literally the world that you perceive through the senses, as opposed to the noumenal. The opposite of phenomenal is noumenal, which is the world where you directly perceive truth. Okay, and the whole idea of meditation is that energy is created through food, through breathing healthy air, through living properly, and that energy is usually dissipated out through the senses. But meditation, what it does, it turns that energy around and brings it back inwards into the body. And when you increase that energy level significantly, that's when you start to get real progress. And seriously, if you want to measure, no matter what Dan you are, first Dan to 10th Dan, if you want to measure your spiritual growth, it can easily be measured in something like how well do you react to those fluctuations of the phenomenal world? Do you easily get upset by things? Do you get angry easily? And if you do you take time to calm down, or do you hold grudges? I've known people who have marketed their entire lives around the fact that they're very high ranked in one martial art or another, who their entire lives they hold these incredible grudges against someone because of something that happened when they were 21 years old or something like that, and that's just like, please, that's just foolishness. So I think if you want to incorporate some sort of spiritual activity in your day-to-day life, start off with self-reflection. Well, you can start off in the morning by taking a couple of breaths and going, today's going to be a fantastic day, and you give your mind an opportunity with positive thoughts. Something really good is going to happen today. And that you do a little bit of self-reflection and ask, it's not, there's the old saying, anyone can smile when the world floats along like a song, but the man worthwhile is a man with a smile when everything's going dead wrong, and that's what you got to, the only growth you ever get in life is the growth that comes through the challenges. And we know that from our karate, because you're only as strong as your opponents. And no one likes, relatively, we don't like it when we're sparring really hard and getting beat up all the time by someone. But it's only afterwards that you realize what benefits that has. Well, that's life in a nutshell. Getting beat up in life is what really gives you that incredible growth over time, provided you're doing the self-reflection and provided you're thinking about it, going, well, what lessons can I learn from that? Anyway, that was a long-winded answer, wasn't it? Let's have a look.
Thank you.
Us, Michelle, Marco, us, good to see you. Us, Senpai Al, us, good on you. Any question? This could be fun. Well, within reason. Mark, us, Sensei Mike, Sebastian, good on you. Hell yeah, I like your views already. Us. Mark, I would think that third or fourth dan, we could expect the person to have established a good degree of empathy for the stress fighters go through, empathy for students and challenges that they have. Well, that's true. Once again, I have to say, Mark, provided those third and fourth dans came in a legitimate way. So every dan, particularly the 40-man kumite, should represent a rite of passage. And they should, by their nature, open up a doorway to a new level of experience. And in that respect, I agree with you wholeheartedly that as a third or fourth dan, we should have developed a good degree of empathy. And you'll see that many of them do. They can still have, they have that degree of consideration and empathy. At the same time, you can have that deep empathy, but still be an idiot who overreacts to things, So once again, you can be very empathetic in the certain situations, but how empathetic are you under pressure in an environment that you're not personally happy with? That's a real challenge, I think. But that's a good point. I think that's true. Excuse me, I had a cough all week and it still hasn't gone away. One problem is people trying to get higher when they would be better served trying to go deeper. In that respect, yeah, too hard. Look, I think this is, if I may extend on that, Mike, I think it's a sign of the times, in that I know when I was younger, and certainly in your day too, because you're a generation before me, that, a second dan or a third dan were as rare as hen's teeth. Now it's like there are fifth dans and sixth dans left, right, and center. And it's got to the point now, it's almost like we have to do it. You go through the colored belts, and provided you do the training and do the right thing in the grading, you get your belt. Okay, well, that's okay for orange belt and blue belt and all these sort of things. But when you're talking about black belts, it's a very different thing. And I think that's a good point, is that people feel as though the climb through the cues and then through the dans should just be this unbroken, steady progress. And finally, yeah, I'll get to it's just not like that. You shouldn't ever have it in your mind that just because you're a second dan, you deserve a third dan one day. And just because you're a third dan, you deserve a fourth dan one day.
I heard your grappling coach, John Donahue, say in an interview recently, he said some people, they're just not even cut out to be black belts. They should never get there because of different reasons. And that's a very different view to the view that we're just discussing now.
Yeah, so. Indeed. And I think in Kyokushin, at least, that's the only karate I can really talk about. I think Kyokushin, the process from white belt through to black belt is fairly standard and fairly set. And provided you get there and you do your 40 rounds of kumite, well, then it's understood that you've fulfilled a certain rite of passage, and then you've earned your showdown. In systems like BJJ, for example, where there is no set syllabus and there is no set grading per se, some schools do, some don't. Ironically, the schools that I know that, the schools that I know that do gradings are all highly influenced by the instructor's previous experience in other martial arts. So I think eventually BJJ will incorporate a much more robust and rounded understanding of Budo, of martial art. That the moment it's not, and it's true. But it not only what John Donahue says is, some people, they shouldn't even be thinking of getting their black belt. It's just not on. I mean, to me, it's like the 10-year-old black belt. It's just not realistic in any way, shape, or form. You can't rationalize or justify a 10-year-old kidding. Like Jean LaBelle says, I don't care how good the 10-year-old black belt is. I'm going to pick him up by his ankles, turn him upside down, and shake all the marbles out of his pocket.
Yeah.
And that's a brilliant way of saying that psychologically, emotionally, a 10-year-old kid is just not ready for the rigors of the black belt, which you may remember Peter Urban in his book, The Karate Dojo, little classic, and he says that the student becomes a black belt unwittingly because he may never change. He may never be the same again. Okay, and that's what a black belt should be like. That's a fair call. Is there any possibility that Kyokushin will ever be under the one banner again? No. What would stop this happening? Ego, yep, and money. I think now that people have got a taste of the potential that they personally have in the groups, and then they think if it got back together, where would they go? I mean, if it did get back together as a single group, certain people who have very high positions in some groups would not even count. There are some groups out there run by people who have no authority to be doing what they're doing. And in a room full of qualified people, starting with soul-size students and then students who have fulfilled certain fundamentals of the Kyokushin, the rigorous Kyokushin way, there are certain people who are out there making a fortune by running their own organization who would just have to sit in the corner and hope no one says anything to them, like a coward, because what they've done is actually not right for Kyokushin. So people like that have a vested interest in making sure that Kyokushin never comes back together again. But I think certain groups may work well together. I think there are some groups are far more open to coming back together than others. I think any group that refuses to come back, it's not wrong altogether, because I know that, see, if you break away as a group and you hang around for 5 years and then you come back trying to claim legitimacy, and if the other group accepts them just because they're magnanimous of heart, well, then that actually reinforces their legitimacy, which they have no right to anyway. So I can understand why some groups just go, no, completely not interested, go away. So who knows what will happen in a generation or two when there are certain, I'm fairly adamant that there are a half a dozen high-ranking students of Solsai whose personality clashes was the beginning of the whole split. And when they die, who knows what will happen? Maybe people will go,
what are we doing?
What are we doing?
Yeah,
exactly. So you never know. It's a fair question. Why I stopped grading in the late 80s, I prefer to earn someone respect by my actions. Yeah. That's a fair call. There is a legitimate reason for gradings as well. I think particularly if you are a member of an organization and you do have a role or responsibility where you're encouraging students to grade up and to keep, when I say grade up, I mean to keep developing and deepening their karate. As Sensei Mike said, if you're going to go up, you've got to go deeper. So it's a two-way. That's the iceberg idea. If you see someone has grown legitimately, if you see someone has grown that much, you look at them and you're going, wow, they've really, really made big gains. They're emotionally, spiritually, technically, physically. Well, you can be certain that the growth on the depth is also there. That's really, really important. So if we have a responsibility in an organization where we do have to take part in gradings and encourage people to grade, well, then it's important that you lead by example. You go through the gradings necessary and that are appropriate for your age, so that you can pull these people up and inspire these people. But I've seen dojos where the instructor never goes past Shodan. Well, what do his good students do?
Same problem.
Yeah, it's a bit of a problem. Us, Marco, with great respect, karate gathering under banners is perhaps one of the biggest problems. There, I didn't read that first. Yeah, I don't think it'll,
Just practice. It should always be enough. That's such a great response.
Yeah, and they do have a thing called shuhari. It's a Japanese concept, and the simple way that it's most commonly explained is you have the tree grows up, branches grow out, fruit drops off, and that fruit creates its own trees. Well, that's the whole nature of if you were to take back the martial arts, let's say 150, 200 years, where all these different styles didn't exist, and you did have everyone together, well, then I'm not too sure that you'd have the same level of growth and expansion that you have today, because people leave organizations for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes they're not good, but sometimes they may be reasonable, and what it does lead to is a legitimate level of growth. It's the story of when Solsai left Sonei Chu is very beautiful, in that even Sonei Chu said after Solsai died that we all supported him. Sonei Chu was very adamant that right up to Sonei Chu's own death, everyone was supportive of Solsai and what he was doing. Everyone who understood that Solsai, even though he broke away from Goju, he was actually helping the whole martial arts community. So all of the groups rose up, and Sonei Chu had no bone in his body of anger and jealousy about his student leaving and starting Kyokushin. And the story about the time when he went to Sonei Chu and asked for his taciturn approval to leave is a very beautiful example of two great martial artists. So I think very true that it's never going to go. It's never going to happen. Yes. Victor, Shihan, thank you. We missed you last week. I would like to ask on technique. Would you kindly summarize the fundamental core 54 again? Well, off the top of my head, basically what you have is, if you were to use Pareto's law, and as much as I'd heard of the idea of 80-20, it was actually Mitch that explained to me more clearly the whole concept of the 80-20 rule and Pareto's law, being that pretty well 20% of what you do supplies 80% of what you use, and 20% of your training supplies 80% of the outcome. That whole rule is quite profound. So I just took the core 54 and figured that if you were to take the basics, the moving basics, the combinations, the possible fundamental fight techniques, and extrapolate that into a fundamental body of knowledge that you'd need to get your black belt, I think it turns out that approximately 20% of that is around 50 or so. I like 54 because there's a magic number. 54 times 2 is 108, and in all religions 108 has a special significance. The Hindu prayer beads has 108 beads. The rosary has 54 beads. There's a significance in that number. But anyway, all I did with the core 54 was take, of the 16 stances, there are 5 fundamental stances, some fundamental footwork patterns, 5 footwork patterns, 8 fundamental hand techniques, 8 fundamental kick techniques, 8 body shapes to counter those hand techniques, and 8 fundamental shapes to counter the kicks. And then you combine that with conditioning. So you have your the four main somatics: speed, strength, cardiovascular endurance, and flexibility. And I added another one, which I call impact resistance, sturdiness, the ability to take impact, which is very important. And there are certain exercises which we do to help build your body against big impact. And then you fundamentally, that's all the core 54 is zeroing in on the key techniques, principles, movements, and skills that you need as a strong foundation of your training. So that's the idea of the core 54 in a nutshell. Eric, could you share a pivotal moment of your time with Uchideshi that profoundly shaped your understanding of Kyokushin and how that insight influences you in practice today? Good question. I think probably is when I saw how profoundly humble Sosai was, but how fiercely protective of his students and his organization was. So he never made a big thing out of himself. This is, people say, Sosai made it, and so other people made a big thing out of Sosai, and rightfully so, because anyone who trained with him, and I'm not talking about my generation, the generation before, who actually sparred with him and who actually saw him doing his training, he was another level. But he never played on that. He was incredibly humble, incredibly charming, actually. He was very popular, and he loved talking about the benefits of martial arts and answering questions about that. And this comes through in his books too, because he honestly felt that his dharma, his role in life, was to serve mankind through teaching them the benefits of martial arts training. And so as an Uchideshi, I think it changed later. You look at Nick Pettis era and that sort of era, I think it changed from Friday to Thursday. I'm not too sure, around the other way. But once a week, Salsa would come to dinner with Uchideshi, and he would very kindly buy everyone a really nice piece of cake. And then we'd sit there and we'd have questions and the conversations with him. The Uchideshi, of course, he was like a demigod. So they'd sit there and he'd have to encourage the conversation and ask them questions about themselves and so on. And like this, and he'd try to encourage them to relax. And watching him, the way he treated these guys like his own children was very profound. And it made me realize that, Yogananda, in his autobiography, says, as strong as thunder, I think is what he used, when standing up for your principles, but as gentle and giving as a flower when dealing with others. And Sosai's own interpretation of that, when he signed his name, and he did that thing at the end, which they call a kao, which means a flower imprint, actually. But his was the Chinese characters for lion written in the shape of a flower. So his life philosophy, and I one of my regrets is that he explained this on a piece of paper at dinner once, and I left the piece of paper on the tray. But yeah, I know. Imagine if I had that. But he explained that to deal with others, you must be as gentle and giving as a flower, but when it comes to your own training and principles, you must be as strong as a lion. And that was very profound in my books. The number of times where I've been interpreting for Sosai with meetings with all kinds of random people, quite often they were executives from publishing houses or things like that. And in the process of interpreting, I'm almost drawn to tears at how profoundly beautiful what he was saying was. And I realized, and he said, it all came from his own experience. And when you read his book, Seiken Ichigeki, which is up there, there somewhere, which is a book of questions and answers. And he would give answers. Anyone could write in and ask him questions, and he would get answers. But invariably, at the end of it, he'd go, "You know what? If you train hard, this answer will become self-evident to you." So I think the degree that Solsai gave of himself, some people say he probably gave too much because he got taken advantage of quite often. But at the same time, how profoundly protective he was of righteousness and what he believed in. Of course, Roland, message retracted. Oh, now you got me wondering, Roland. What do you make of shady grading promotions? I know a certain someone in Melbourne who promoted a Gokan-Ryu karate second dan to Kyokushin first dan with a year and a half. Look, I have no comment on that. I've seen it myself, and I have very little time for it. I've even seen people who are adamant about wanting to grade someone within our group. They just leave and join another group. And of course, that group has no idea of the history of these people that they've been asked to grade. So they will just go on the word of what the instructor says and grade them. But if they knew their personality, they would know that they're not ready for it. So, yeah, I think there's a real problem, and I have no solution for it other than just stick to your guns and stick to your training, because like Sensei Mike says, the grades are irrelevant. I go and train with someone, I do not care if they're a Shodan or an 8th Dan. If I know them to be a legitimate 8th Dan or 9th Dan, I will give them the respect that they've earned. But if I'm training with someone, I don't care what Dan they are. If they have something of value that they have processed through their own training, I will 100% jump on it and ask them to teach it and show it. I have no problem at all. I think the grades have become almost irrelevant, other than for the hierarchical system that we believe we're in. Yep, the love of money is the root of all evil. That's true. Us, Gary, good to see you. Lolito, good to see you. Ocean, Luis Gaston, Coyer. Oh, thank you. Good to see you. I hope everything's going well in Argentina. Us. No worries, Eric. I originally wrote that when I started Kyokushin 1901, there was only one throne. When I returned in 2018, it was more like a Game of Thrones. That's pretty funny, Roland. You're right, though. It has changed profoundly. Everything changed when Sosai died, but I think that's probably par for the course. It happens even in Goju, and when Choju Miyagi died, you had a lot of fighting, and Goju split up, and Shotokan too. It's the name of the game. It's just what happens. There we go. So anyway, I hope those were some answers that you enjoyed. We might leave it there because that's a good half an hour. But if you want to come back, please leave a comment underneath. If you've got anything you'd like to add, contribute, or complain about, just do it. If you are one of the 2 or 3 people in the world who haven't subscribed, please do so. We'll get there eventually. But I think the whole idea of karate being nothing more than a fierce fighting art, or any martial art, is completely the antithesis of what at least Sosai taught, and what is increasingly obvious to real masters of the arts over the years, in that their physical technique is good, but with age, physical technique wanes, and what they lose with age, they gain in wisdom and their willingness and their ability to share that and keep passing that on to people. So I think they're good questions, because I have a theory that everybody is religious, even those atheists and agnostics. I think eventually all they're really doing is, I know many atheists whose argument against being religious is actually very sound, because there's so much kerfuffle in religion. But I also do believe the Latin root of the word religion, religare, which means to bring together, to bind together, particularly to bring people together with what is necessary in their life. So I think if you want to just add to your karate so that you can start to progress in a spiritual way, in a way at least that you want people to think, because you're doing the martial arts, everyone thinks you're something special, but no, you're just a rat bag like everyone else, unless you're doing things to change that inner environment. And the first step to change your inner environment is to reflect every day and ask yourself, how did I go? Was I a dickhead again? Or am I starting to make some sort of progress because I have a sense, like Sensei Mike said, I have a sense of empathy. I have a degree of consideration for other people without being forced into it. And especially I'm able to maintain a decorum and maintain a calmness under pressure in situations. I mean, anybody can lose it. So if you want to actually rise above the tide, you've got to be able to maintain emotional control and so on when everyone else is losing it. It's like that Rudyard Kipling poem. He says, you know, when you can hold your head, when everyone around you is losing theirs. Yeah, exactly. That's very important. Well, thanks, Mike. It's just always a real honor and pleasure to have you. Alex Dunn, happy birthday, buddy. Yes, I think it's your birthday soon, isn't it? Or now, or today. What's today? 26. Is it your birthday?
I think Chris is in 2 days.
Yeah, Chris is on the 28th.
And
Alex. Alex is my nephew there. See Alex Dunn? And his older sister, I think she's 31st of January. And Alex, I think are you around 26, if I remember right? And Christian around the 28th. But anyway, good on you. Well, I mean, if you have alternative viewpoint, Harry, you're more than welcome to put them there. That's the whole idea of these discussions. You know, some people think that there is no point to it all, that there is no spiritual thing. I'm happy to discuss that. People say, well, there is no God because there is no proof of God. But the whole idea of science is to disprove hypotheses, you know, and so far no one's been able to come close to disproving anything about God. And if they try to, they usually draw on arguments from the phenomenal world, particularly the behavior of people who supposedly represent God, you know, like church leaders who get in trouble for pedophilia and things like that. It's a terrible, horrible situation to be in. There you go, Alex. Happy birthday, man. Good on you. For me, martial arts is purely about being prepared to battle in circumstances require it. But given that to excel in martial arts, you have to master yourself. Yes, that's a really good answer too, in that you have to be balanced on the both sides, in that, you know, a calm fighter is a dangerous fighter. And like Gary O'Neill said at the camp, if you want to get even the best fighter, put them off their game, get them anything but calm.
Yeah, get them thinking.
Get them out of that comfort zone. So that's a really good comment there. Good on you. Us, look forward to seeing you. I'm off to tournaments, but anyway, yep. And I look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be back for that. Mitch has got a broken toe at the moment, but he's been managing it well. So it's just a matter of time before he's back training twice a day instead of once. Yeah, good on you.
Nothing.
Good on you guys. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much. And if you have any more questions about anything, and if I can answer it, I will. If I can't, well, we'll work out a way to find a solution to it. Just leave it in the comments below. Share, like, spread the word. We're looking forward to increasing it, everyone. Thanks, guys.